Where would you be now if the judge looking at the photos made the same mistake that the artificial intelligence did?
I'd be in prison right now.
CBSN Originals, breakthrough documentaries, streaming free on CBSN and anytime on the CBS News app.
The first group of Afghans who worked with the U.S. military are arriving in the U.S. The Biden administration says so far nearly 2,500 people have been approved to enter the U.S. They'll stay at Fort Lee in Virginia until they finish medical exams and application processing. The evacuations are part of President Biden's promise to help Afghan interpreters, guides, and contractors, as well as their families. Many face threats from the Taliban for their work supporting U.S. troops. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is warning Iran that negotiations over its nuclear deal cannot go on indefinitely. Tensions have been rising over the stalled talks. Blinken spoke in Kuwait Thursday. He told reporters the U.S. is more than willing to continue negotiations, but, quote, the ball remains in Iran's court.
The fact of the matter is, it is Iran that has decisions to make, fundamental decisions to make about whether it, too, wants to return to compliance, and there is no amount of deflection that can change that basic fact.
Back in 2018, then President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal. Since then, the U.S. has been indirectly involved in reviving a deal that would relieve Iran from international sanctions. And in Lebanon, fires have killed at least one person, a 15-year-old boy who was helping firefighting efforts there. There's no official estimate of the acres burned, but wildfires in the north of the country have spread into Syria. Lebanon is asking neighboring Cyprus for help, which only days ago extinguished its worst brush fire in decades. Wyoming Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney is expected to face a primary challenge in the 2022 midterm elections. There are already several Wyoming GOP members who are being vetted to take Cheney's place as the state's only House representative. So far, all of them have been in talks with former President Trump. The Congresswoman has been at odds with Mr. Trump on a number of issues. Most notably, she voted to impeach him over his role in the January 6th Capitol attack. For more on this, I want to bring in Nick Reynolds. He is a politics and policy reporter for WYO File. Nick, thanks for being here. So how do voters and state representatives in Wyoming currently feel about Congresswoman Cheney?
Well, it's really difficult to say definitively. We don't really have a lot of good polling on this race yet, so it's kind of difficult to have a real scientific measure of where we actually sit right now. What we do know is almost every county Republican Party has voted to censure her, as well as the state party. But beyond messaging, the state party really doesn't have too much sway in the state. They don't raise a ton of money, and you don't really have many elected leaders beyond the most conservative members of the Wyoming House of Representatives, for example, who actually participate in party activities. But there is a lot of vitriol that we can see, and an anti-Cheney rally back in January, for instance, was one of the largest public protests in Wyoming since the days of the Tea Party. And I've been to numerous events of people planning to unseat her. GOP meetings are more packed than ever, and many new members of the party I've talked to specifically cite Cheney's vote as a reason for getting involved. So there is a lot of visible disdain toward our current representative around the state. Of course, you see the inverse as well. It doesn't really pay right now to vocally support Cheney. We had a very hard swing to the right in last year's primary elections, so a lot of electeds are very wary about what they say publicly, but they are quietly supportive of her. And we've seen from a lot of people that January 6th was a very visceral event for a lot of people, and we haven't really seen an unbiased survey of the public's opinion on that just yet.
Well, Nick, there are quite a few names already being floated as potential challengers to Congresswoman Cheney. Might this actually end up helping her in the long run?
Yeah, and I think that's on everyone's minds already. I mean, we even saw this back in January. Actually, Donald Trump Jr. Was lobbying for us to pass a runoff election bill, which has been a sitting issue for some time. Crowded Republican primaries are kind of a signature of Wyoming politics, given it's a Republican-dominated state and all the action is really on one side of the aisle. So you can pretty much predict the winner of elections here in the primaries, and people usually turn out in force for those. We can name the 2018 governor's race, for example, where Governor Mark Gordon escaped with just over 1/3 of the vote in the Republican primary, while his two closest finishers combined for more than 40%. The first time Cheney got in, that was, I think, a 9-way race, and she got through with less than half the vote. A number of her challengers combined for I think about 55% of that, her three closest challengers, I should say. We've seen that in Secretary of State's races. And I think the candidates themselves are trying to put pressure on the rest of the field to try and respond to that, or recognize that if they want to get Cheney out, they have to consolidate. An internal poll by Chuck Gray, one of the candidates in this race earlier, presented scenarios for what it would look like in a 5-way race versus a 3-way race. And in all those scenarios, Cheney fares a lot better when we're looking at a more crowded field. But they're trying to make the argument that if I'm the candidate you pick, I'm going to pose the best chance of defeating Cheney. And I think every candidate is trying to do that right now, trying to convince voters that if they had an opportunity to go one-on-one against Cheney, they would come out on top.
What are you seeing in terms of fundraising numbers?
Yeah, from a campaign finance standpoint, Cheney has frankly been killing it. For the last 2 quarters, she's set consecutive records, $1.3 million in quarter one, 1.8 in quarter two, which is a substantial improvement. If we're talking about the total amount of cash on hand, she actually has nearly 5 times the total cash on hand of all of her opponents combined. So we're looking at a pretty significant war chest here. That said, Cheney has a lot of support that a lot of candidates don't have. She still has some PAC support. And even though she was one of, I think, the top 10 members of the House in fundraising in regards to individual donations, people like Anthony Bouchard have done extremely well from a purely grassroots perspective. He's been up there. He's raised about $600,000 right now without relying on any political action committees whatsoever, primarily small donors from all areas of the country, and a campaign very much focused on social media. We have Darren Smith, of course, who is actually an alum of Pat Robertson's Christian Broadcasting Network, who had access to what appeared to be a very large network of deep-pocketed donors. He had fewer than 100 contributions, but among the challengers was the second best fundraiser just from an individual contribution standpoint. Of course, the person with the most cash on hand right now. Oh, sorry, I apologize.
No, I want to make sure that we also had time not just to talk about fundraising, but also some of that other soft power. Former President Trump's influence, his surrogate's influence in this race, including, as you mentioned, Donald Trump Jr., but also Congressman Matt Gaetz, Mark Meadows. And then obviously, Congresswoman Cheney's father is the former Vice President, Dick Cheney.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see that influence play out. And I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions about how it will ultimately play out. Cheney's campaign right now is kind of in its infancy. Of course, she's the incumbent and has that advantage to her so far. So from a campaigning standpoint, she's been quiet so far, and so has Dick Cheney in that process. I don't think it's really time to roll them out yet, and we haven't really seen much more than visits to the Chamber of Commerce and local groups from Liz to really indicate that her campaign is in full swing. The Trump effect has been interesting, I should say. He has been in touch with the Wyoming GOP's chairman, Frank Thorne, about a potential visit to the state soon. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, his son was actively lobbying in the legislature this year. I mean, from afar, but his influence was felt. And we've also seen some involvement more behind the scenes. It's not really out in front, but there was a Politico piece a couple of days that showed that his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was in the state trying to do some of the groundwork to vet some candidates. And we've seen indications of that by the party's activities, too. There have been a few different political action committees that have popped up that are seeking to vet challengers against her. One has even reached out to some members of Congress, including Representative Dan Crenshaw, just trying to get some people involved in helping to vet the candidates. We've obtained emails and screenshots of people within the Wyoming GOP showing some fairly active involvement in the race. And tonight, actually, there's a joint fundraiser happening involving Governor Mark Gordon and Kristi Noem that was partly brought together by a group of people looking to unseat Cheney. They were completely separate events, but you can kind of see that there's a bit of a Venn diagram in the political scene here right now.
Well, we'll continue to be watching all of it. Nick Reynolds, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Summer camps across the country have been battling coronavirus outbreaks. Now there are concerns that this summer could be a preview of the upcoming school year. Nikki Batiste has more.
In rural Hudson, New York, where 67% of those 12 and up are fully vaccinated, news of a COVID outbreak at nearby Camp Pontiac has rattled the community.
By Monday, it was 23. By Wednesday, it was 31. They're all in the 7 to 11 age group, so they're, of course, unvaccinated.
Jack Mebb is public health director in Columbia County, where the camp is located.
What was your reaction?
Oh, crap. I can't say that, can I? I think that was pretty much our reaction. We haven't seen this.
This summer, outbreaks have been reported at camps around the country. In North Carolina, a camp outbreak is linked to at least 75 cases in 17 states. At Pontiac, almost all older campers and staff were fully vaccinated, and everyone was tested on the first day. Still, it wasn't enough.
COVID can get in there, whether it's the variant or not, despite everything that you do. And I think that's a harbinger for the schools come fall.
New this fall in Columbia County schools, funding for nurses to do rapid on-site testing. But protocols for cafeterias, athletics, and buses are up in the air as the county waits on guidance from New York State.
If buses still have to keep 6 feet or 3 feet between students, that's not going to allow us to bring all of our students back.
My granddaughter starts here in 5 weeks as a 5-year-old.
You worried about her?
Yes, I am.
A worry that will only grow as summer winds down and the school year starts. Nikki Batiste, CBS News, Hudson, New York.
More than 196 million coronavirus cases have been reported around the globe. In many countries, the Delta variant is fueling new record-breaking surges. But the opposite is happening in the United Kingdom. Ian Lee explains.
Tokyo hits yet another record number of new daily coronavirus cases as the Olympic Games continue. A Japanese official said Thursday they've never experienced a rise in infections like this. Around the world, the Delta variant is fueling the surge. Russian officials blame it for a record number of new daily deaths. While down in Australia, Sydney has turned into a ghost town. Officials extended the city's lockdown after a sharp rise in cases.
We can only assume that things are likely to get worse before they get better.
The UK fully reopened earlier this month despite a spike in cases, but now new infections are plummeting. And scientists here don't know why. Could it be fewer large sporting events, people not wanting to get tested, or as some have suggested, the UK is reaching herd immunity?
It is very, very important that we don't allow ourselves to run away with premature conclusions. People have got to remain very cautious.
But in Africa, many countries are still struggling with the pandemic. In Senegal, hospitals are so overwhelmed, officials fear the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse. Ian Lee, CBS News, London.
Less than 50% of Americans are fully vaccinated against COVID. And as the U.S. deals with a surplus in doses, overseas vaccines are often hard to come by. Cindy Sue from our media partners at BBC News shows us how tourists are coming here to the U.S. to get their shots.
These tourists from many countries have come to the United States to get vaccinated against COVID-19.
It's not just for Brazil or for the U.S., it's for the world. Like, everybody wants the world to come back to the normal life.
Besides Latin America, many of the travelers have come from Asia, including this 84-year-old grandmother who just got off a flight from Vietnam. Her granddaughter tells me, even at her age, she can't get vaccinated in her country.
I tell you, in my country, not enough vaccine. That's why not enough for everybody.
Around 50% of U.S. residents are fully vaccinated, but the rates are much lower elsewhere, including around 20% in South America, 10% in Asia, and just 1.5% in Africa. Just the San Francisco airport alone has vaccinated around 1,000 passengers arriving from over 50 countries since May, and the demand is growing. The shortage of vaccines and the slow vaccination rates in many places around the world, including Taiwan and other parts of Asia, have driven a trend in vaccine tourism. The U.S. is making it easy by offering free vaccines to anyone in its territory without requiring residency.
We've got a surplus supply, and being able to make that available for others is really a good thing, and it really helps everyone. It helps other countries to vaccinate their population faster. It helps reduce the barriers of international travel that currently exist. And so ultimately, everybody wins when we offer a program like this.
Taiwanese people like Amber Zhou, who prefers the two-shot vaccines, have simply walked into U.S. pharmacies and filled out a consent form to get the jabs. She has spent $18,000 just on plane tickets and hotel lodging for a month, but she says it's worth it.
I have a daughter, 7 years old, and my parents over 70 years old. I need to protect myself, then I can protect my family.
打完了。
I feel so happy. Right now, I feel like I'm a superwoman.
Cindy Sue, BBC News, San Francisco.
Well, some U.S. businesses are rethinking their return to office plans as the Delta variant spreads. Others are moving forward. Goldman Sachs called thousands of financial employees back to its offices last month, and a number of other banks are rushing to do the same. But an increasing percentage of American workers are not on board with giving up remote work. And in a tight job market, employers often don't have the upper hand. For more, let's bring in New York Times business reporter Coral Murphy-Marcos. Coral, thanks for being here. So I mentioned banks already, but what other businesses are returning to the office and why?
Thank you for having me. So we looked at a generational divide between people that want to return to the office and do not. And we see a lot of employees in the banking sector that want to return to the office. Besides that, we're seeing a lot of people in creativity and media sectors. They would much rather have a face-to-face collaboration and just have more collegiality in person.
So let's talk about that generational divide in just a moment. But first, let's frame this within the Delta variant, because it's put a lot of things back into question. Infections are back up. The CDC changed its guidance on mask wearing again. Coral, could rushing employees back to the office actually be harmful to businesses?
Well, a lot of offices are now reconsidering their return to work plans. We saw Apple and Google delaying their return to office date, and a lot of other companies are following suit. I think a lot of people are concerned with the rise of the Delta variant. The last place they want to be is in the office with several other colleagues.
Morgan Stanley's chief executive, James Gorman, actually threatened pay cuts if staffers don't return to the office by Labor Day. Why is he pushing this? And are businesses potentially exposed to financial or legal risks if they force a return to the office?
Right. So a lot of companies are trying to incentivize their workers to return to the office, and it could raise some legal issues and other financial issues. For example, in the legal issues, we have companies with unions who might question vaccine requirements, and they might request more to keep their colleagues safe. And financial issues that could be raised, well, a lot of managers are actually doing the opposite. They're offering even flexibility because they don't want to lose colleagues or employees because they'd much rather work remote. And some employees quit and try to look for another job that does allow them to work from home 5 days a week. And some people say, well, it's not worth losing this employee, so I will offer some type of flexibility.
So how do you reconcile that then with Gorman's statement? We put that up there for our viewers. I'm hoping we can put that up there again and show them exactly what he said. He basically said that if you want to get paid New York rates, you work in New York. None of this I'm in Colorado and getting paid like I'm sitting in New York City. Sorry, that doesn't work. Why is he pushing? Because that's not incentivizing. That's threatening people with their salary if they don't return to work.
Right. So in my reporting, I spoke to a lot of managers to see why they are insisting and sort of pushing their workers to return. And they cite a lot of loss of collegiality. They say that Zoom meetings and just doing everything virtually is not the same. They feel that a lot more brainstorming and creative sessions happen in person. They also feel that networking is a very important component to the job, and if you're not in the office, you're just not going to get that. Besides, they said that you might not have a mentor or a proper mentorship program if you're online. While you're in the office, you do sort of get that mentorship from your boss or from a supervisor. And a lot of in-person collaboration, they feel, is much more productive in person.
So you mentioned earlier a generational divide that you found in your research. Talk to us about why younger employees seem to be more tied to the work-at-home model, and how are companies trying to appeal to younger workers?
Yeah, so younger workers actually prefer the flexibility of working from home. They said that they have more time in the home to do things that they might have done while going to work. For example, I interviewed someone that said had a 40-minute commute to work, 40-minute commute back. And she said, with that extra time, I have time to cook, exercise, and they also save a lot of money precisely in that commute, in clothing, in makeup, and they feel that they can just have more free time to themselves if they work from home.
So studies have consistently seemed to find that productivity increased with work from home models. Given this, is there a sense that these employers that you spoke with feel that remote work or hybrid work are something that might stay regardless of the Delta variant or the current pandemic?
So this is something we're seeing pan out right now, and it's still developing. So as you said, production rates were the same during the pandemic. And a lot of people feel that if that was so, they should also be allowed to work from home if it doesn't affect productivity. So a lot of workplaces are seeing what can they offer in the future: hybrid, 5 days in the office, 5 days from home, complete flexibility, and to see how better to shape their company.
All right, Coral Murphy-Marcos, thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with the rest of the day's news. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
An original documentary on CBSN.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now.
CBS News.
This is what fire crews are up against.
The highest quality journalism.
It explains not just who or what or where, but why.
CBS News. This is why.
The world's largest rainforest is on fire.
This is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
You can say what you like.
How far are you willing to go to ensure QAnon prevails?
To the ends of the earth.
For the rest of my life.
The Christian right, they're not advocating for everybody's religious liberties. They're advocating for theirs.
CBSN Originals. Stories that challenge what you know.
Do you see any room for gun legislation?
No.
Take you deeper.
Why do people deny science?
And broaden your understanding of our world.
Where would you be now if the judge looking at the photos made the same mistake that the artificial intelligence did?
I'd be in prison right now.
CBSN Originals. Breakthrough documentaries. Streaming free on CBSN and anytime on the CBS News app.
CBS News.
This is what fire crews are up against.
Breaking news streaming all day long.
And always just a click away.
The highest quality journalism
It explains not just who or what or where, but why.
CBS News. This is why.
The U.S. job market is showing some signs of recovery. The number of Americans filing jobless claims dropped by 24,000 last week compared to the week prior. 400,000 Americans filed. That's still more than where claims were before the pandemic. Meanwhile, a record 9.2 million job openings were posted in May, and many companies are still struggling to fill those vacancies. In Space Watch, Russia successfully docked a new laboratory module with the International Space Station on Thursday. The Nauka multipurpose lab will give Russia more room for experiments and space for the crew. The long-delayed upgrade is Russia's first new addition to the ISS since 2010. It was originally slated to launch in 2007, but suffered several issues and delays. Russian cosmonauts will now perform up to 11 spacewalks to get the module up and running. The Russian lab ended up causing NASA to scrub its launch set for Friday. The Boeing Starliner was docked and ready to take off for the ISS, but Nauka inadvertently fired its thrusters, causing the space station to temporarily lose orientation. A new launch date has not yet been announced. A chubby panda was born at the Wulong Nature Reserve in southwest China on Tuesday, weighing 249 grams, or a little bit more than half a pound. To put that into perspective, newborn pandas typically weigh only between 85 and 140 grams. The Nature Reserve believes that this little guy is the heaviest captive-bred giant panda cub in the world. Mom and baby are both very healthy, and according to keepers at the Panda Center, she is taking good care of her new little one. Here's a look at some of the stories that we're covering in our next hour. Health officials are trying to dispel misinformation surrounding COVID and vaccines as the Delta variant continues to cause numbers to spike. Plus, President Biden issues new vaccine guidelines for federal workers and contractors and proposes new incentives to get more people to roll up their sleeves. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
An original documentary on CBSN.
Society is deeply uncomfortable with a woman holding power.
For women, corporate America has been an uphill battle.
You're emotional, you're harsh, you're cold.
And it still is.
That's when I realized womanness was at a disadvantage for me.
Women of color sit at the painful intersection of race and gender discrimination.
You put in the work, and you're ultimately not the one who gets credit for it.
Many professional women had to make a decision between employment and caregiving.
Gender discrimination is the one thing that has transcended time and race and religion. It is literally written into the Bible.
Women in the Workplace, the unfinished fight for equality. Download the free CBS News app to watch.
The world's largest rainforest is on fire.
This is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
You can say what you like.
How far are you willing to go to ensure QAnon prevails?
To the ends of the earth.
For the rest of my life.
The Christian right, they're not advocating for everybody's religious liberties. They're advocating for theirs.
I hope you belong.
CBSN Originals. Stories that challenge what you know.
Do you see any room for gun legislation?
No. Take you deeper
Why do people deny science?
and broaden your understanding of our world.
Where would you be now if the judge looking at the photos made the same mistake that the artificial intelligence did?
I'd be in prison right now.
CBSN Originals. Breakthrough documentaries. Streaming free on CBSN and anytime on the CBS News app.
Did you know CBSN has 11 local streams from coast to coast? You can watch wherever you are. Just download the free CBS News app or check us out on all your favorite platforms. We're
Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. Thank you so much for joining me. The Biden administration is hoping to get more Americans vaccinated against COVID-19 with a series of new measures. On Thursday, President Biden announced federal workers and contractors will now need to show proof of their vaccination status. Those who do not get the shot will be subject to new testing, masking, and social distancing requirements. The measures come as officials race to curb the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant and the rise of misinformation. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang starts off our coverage.
Today, President Biden called out vaccine holdouts and pleaded with them to change their minds.
If, in fact, you're unvaccinated, you present a problem to yourself, to your family, and to those with whom you work.
The Delta variant is driving the latest deadly surge, and so are the 100 million people who are eligible but remain unvaccinated.
Too many people are dying.
To reverse the trend, the president touted new incentives, like urging states to offer $100 to every newly vaccinated American.
I know the pain people who get vaccinated might sound unfair to folks who've gotten vaccinated already. But here's the deal. If incentives help us beat this virus, I believe we should use them.
He also announced that all civilian federal employees, plus contractors, will have to get vaccinated or get tested for COVID-19 weekly or twice a week. They'll be required to wear a mask, social distance, and might have official travel restricted. President Biden also directed the Defense Department to look into requiring vaccines for all service members. States like New York and California, along with a growing number of the country's biggest companies like Facebook, Google, and BlackRock, are taking matters into their own hands, requiring vaccination in order to return to work. More than 600 colleges are also mandating them for at least some students or employees. But young people are also among the most hesitant. A prominent pro-Trump youth group is fueling the fears over the vaccine.
We are not going to tolerate students to be forced to get the vaccine against their will.
The president said it's time to cut through the misinformation.
The vaccine was developed and authorized under a Republican administration, and it's been distributed and administered under a Democratic administration. Look, this is not about red states and blue states.
Weijia Jiang joins me now from the White House for more. Weijia, how quickly are these requirements going to go into effect?
I just spoke to a White House official about this, and they are in effect immediately. The problem is, of course, that these agencies still have to establish programs and plans to get people vaccinated and or tested if they choose not to. And so they will have what officials are currently calling a reasonable amount of time to get those details into place. But so far, we don't know exactly what that means because, again, they just announced the policy. And frankly, I think, they put this together very quickly. And so they don't have a specific time frame. But to your question, the rules are in effect right away.
Okay. And aside from these new requirements, just in terms of the message, the president has delivered similar remarks before. What sparked Thursday's address?
Well, he made very clear that we are dealing with something very different because the Delta variant is powerful, it's growing in power, and the difference is that it is highly contagious among the unvaccinated, unlike other strains. And so that is one reason why we are seeing this push not only for federal workers, but he is encouraging the private sector to follow suit as well, because as Dr. Walensky of the CDC said earlier this week, if this virus continues to spread out of control, the biggest fear is that it will continue to mutate and it will become so powerful that it will break through the vaccine. So even those people who are vaccinated will not have protection, at least not the same amount of protection they have right now. And that's why they're really, pushing for the unvaccinated to change their minds.
One of the things, though, Ouija, that critics have said in falling short of mandates is that things like a federal requirement might create backlash and even more opposition to the COVID vaccine. As you know, it's already become politicized. So how is the White House weighing that concern against its concerns about protecting public health?
Well, I think that's exactly why the White House and the president today stressed that this is a choice. It is not a mandate, and those federal workers who don't want to get a vaccine have options. They can get tested regularly. They can wear a mask all the time. They can have their travel possibly be restricted. They have to social distance. And so the point here is that they are not, tying somebody down and saying you have to get the shot, which I think when people heard the word mandate initially, that's what they assumed would be the case, and it's not that. And so the president said today, in very stark terms, that people who do not get vaccinated and still refuse to get the shot risk being hospitalized or worse. And so at the end of the day, we've heard many times from him and other officials that their biggest priority and biggest concern is saving lives.
Ouija, before I let you go, as you've been following, millions of American renters are in jeopardy now that a federal eviction moratorium is set to expire this weekend. The Biden administration says it's unable to extend the pandemic protections because of a Supreme Court decision last month. How else is the White House handling this?
So even ahead of this looming deadline, which is just days away now, at the end of last month, the White House announced several different measures that they were taking to try to help people who might face eviction. And they are calling on states to put protections into place. They announced several $1 billion of new grants that people could apply for. But really, it is up to Congress. So at this point, they are urging lawmakers on Capitol Hill to extend the federal moratorium on those evictions. But to your point, Lana, there's nothing that the president can do with executive action to do that. So it just depends on whether Congress decides to extend that date, which is July 31st.
All right, Ouija, thanks so much.
Sure.
President Biden says getting vaccinated against the coronavirus is a matter of life and death. His latest push to boost vaccinations comes as the Delta variant fuels a rise in cases across the U.S. More than 70% of Americans now live in counties with high or substantial transmission. Louisiana is one state where cases are skyrocketing, and an alarming number of those cases are kids. David Begnaud reports from New Orleans.
When you think about the COVID vaccine protecting the vulnerable, think about